have other things. Hey, Adam. So,
Hello, Ray.
hey, so first of all, thank you so much for joining me on the Founders Predicament podcast.
My
Um,
pleasure.
I really appreciate your time. And so, for want of just for full disclosure here, Adam and I have known one another for about 5 years. Is that right? 5 years?
I think so.
Yeah, we started off in the same co-working space in Civic Hall pre-pandemic in New York City on 22nd Street and 6th Avenue. And now we're co-working in the same place on 37th Street and 5th Avenue, um, in the same space again, which is nice. And briefly, we shared a little time during the pandemic. Civic Hall kind of reopened for us, and then it shut down again very suddenly. You remember that?
Right. I do remember that.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think we've tried to both be helpful to each other as we go along this entrepreneurial journey that we're both on.
Right. Every opportunity to help me, you help me, and every opportunity to
I
help you, I help you. Yeah.
absolutely, it's been great.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you again for joining me. Um,
Great.
tell me, tell me a bit about who you are, where you're from, how you got here, and you have this startup called Klaatch, Klaatch. Klaatch. Before you tell me about Klaatch, tell me what you did before you started Klaatch.
So before I started Klaatch, I spent a pretty long uh, career. Well, I should say I started off as going to graduate school and studying urban planning and working in the South Bronx, uh, eventually and doing economic development. But eventually funny enough, migrated to investment banking. And I spent 20 plus years as an investment banker, started a couple of different investment banks. One today is the largest investment bank in the renewable energy space that I started with friends in 1998. And so most of my time was in the energy sector, and a lot of that time was in the renewable energy sector, um, both on the private side as well as on the public side. So I was the executive vice president and chief restructuring officer of a public company, and did that kind of financial work. And I considered myself part of the finance and investment banking world for a long time, both domestically and internationally.
Cool. I remember you telling me about being in Scotland and negotiating with Scottish people is notoriously difficult. Um,
Yes, it
not
is.
to denigrate Scots in any way, but
No,
I'm assuming that was to do with oil and gas at that time, not wind.
that was it was an oil and gas, it was a gas transaction actually, a small power plant and a series of gas fields that were in North Yorkshire and that we were selling to Scottish Power. And that was a workout. That was my sort of expertise, is coming into problematic situations and figuring out how to sort of turn lemon into lemonade.
Mm.
But mostly in the energy, and as I said, a lot of it in the renewable energy space.
So when did you leave the energy sector and why?
So after the financial crash in 2008, my business partners at the time had had success in the early 1990s financial crisis in buying distressed assets. And while we had spent most of our time dealing with things of building renewable energy and fossil fuel energy projects, um, we decided that this was an opportunity and we would enter into it. And we ended up teaming up with a group of people to build a residential non-performing distressed trading desk. I was not usually thrilled by this, but sometimes when you're in a partnership, you do those things that your partners feel strongly about, and you have less strong feelings. And
So
we ended
hold
up
on,
buying stuff. Yeah.
those are the what was the word for those? There was a word for those assets. They were the distressed real estate assets. They were called something. what was the common term for that?
Sure, I'm not sure. I mean, they were all just, for us, they were all, we also ended up buying some commercial assets.
Hmm.
But in any event, that wasn't very satisfying work for me. But it was fine. It wasn't hugely successful financially either. Cost us a lot of money to build everything, and it was a very challenging marketplace. And around that time, or through that time, we realized that my dad was really having troubles connecting. My mother passed away in 2010, sort of right as the crisis was sort of, I guess, not at its height, but from a business perspective, was most challenging time. And we knew that we needed to keep my dad connected. We loved him. My kids loved him. We would see him. My sister and her kids lived not so far away, and we were trying to stay in connection with him. But we also expected, after my mother passed away, that eventually he would sort of develop his own group of friends. He was a very social guy. The financial crisis had caused him to have to retire at 75. I don't think he really wanted to, but just the business environment forced him to. And so a lot of his friends were at work, and now he wasn't connected to them anymore. And the more we tried to help, other than going to see him ourselves, which we would see him once or twice a week, he really resisted doing anything. And the more time went on, we noticed a bunch of sort of behavioral changes that were really unlike my dad. And around 2014 or 15, I landed up reading this book by this author named John Cacioppo, who's was this amazing researcher and professor at University of Chicago. It was called Loneliness, Human Nature, and the Need for Social Connection. And what I found out was almost everything I thought about loneliness was wrong, except for the fact that it was having a profound impact on my dad. And I used to tell people my dad was like a veritable roadmap of what happens to somebody when they become socially disconnected. And eventually that set me on a course of reading more and more about initially loneliness, and then subjects like group dynamics and social network theory, happiness, wisdom. And I eventually went to my partners in 2016 and said to them, I love you guys are great, but I am coming to work and I am working on thinking about this issue of loneliness and how we solve this problem, and not about what we're doing. So I'm going to leave and just see if I can figure this out. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I feel like I have to try and figure this out. It's a big problem. My dad had come to live with us in 2016, and after he had some health issues and he had some cognitive decline, and I just decided that was the right time to do that. So luckily I had made some money in my life and we were in a position to be able to do that. And so I just decided I'd start reading and thinking about how I could figure this out. No business in mind, no for profit, not for profit, didn't know what was the solution, didn't have some very strong ideas, had some thoughts, and I started to write them and read and write and share my ideas with people and started to talk to people. And that was the starting of, it wasn't called Klaatch, our original name of the business. The still legal name is Seniors Together, Inc., which I don't really like, but that was where we started out going. And until I met my initial co-founder, who had an expertise in education, and we applied to an accelerator and were forced to basically set up a company because she needed to get paid. That's how the business got started as Seniors Together Inc. That's how we got it going. But it was, at the beginning, we didn't even know, like, I didn't even know before that, was it going to be for profit or not for profit, Ray? It became a for profit business because she needed to get paid and I could put some money in. And one of my buddies said to me, I'll write a check for 12 grand. And He said, get started. And I said, I don't have a bank account. And he said, I don't care. I'm sending you the money right now. This is a good thing. You need to go do this. Go figure it out. I'm behind you. I'll back you. And he's true to that till this day. So that was the beginning of the business.
So just, I know you explained it a little bit, but in the context of your dad, but in a larger context, could you summarize what problem you're solving at Klaatch? What do you think? What's wrong? What's broken, and how are you fixing it?
So the problem that we're trying to solve is, how do we build a new infrastructure of community that enables older adults, who some of whom will become lonely, to stay socially connected and to maintain community so they can live better, happier lives. And that's really, that was the mission to begin with, to overcome the staggering burden of loneliness on older adults and the healthcare and social systems that serve them. That's what we're in business to do. Initially, we thought, I look back on this with a smile on my face, that we could come up with a solution to this. And now I have a different thought about it. I think we can be part of an ecosystem that builds a new infrastructure of community that leverages technology and human connection to build a better connected world, where people feel seen and heard. And we're not going to be the solution. We're going to be part of that ecosystem. And that's sort of where we have evolved over the last couple of years.
So initially, you were trying to solve the problem somehow, and
We originally came up with a program. It eventually turned into a 12-week peer-to-peer coach-led program where it was a structured conversation where every week you'd meet with a group of people. It was not therapy and it was not current events. It was a social group where we explored ideas that were related to the behaviors that are driven by loneliness, because loneliness causes very specific behaviors. We call them at Klaatch the habits of loneliness, but these are generally referred to as self-protective, self-centered, non-empathetic behaviors, like hunger. When you become hangry, it's behaviors that change your personality to get you to do something. In the case of hunger, of course, they're trying to get you to eat, and those behaviors drive people to say, hey, what's wrong with you? You need to eat something. In the case of loneliness, theoretically, it's trying to get you to reconnect and to overcome that sort of physical discomfort that the body is telling us we need to do, because we're social beings, and just like we need food, we need social connection to live and prosper as species on this planet.
Okay. So I know quite a bit about your solution because we work in the same office and we talk more or less every day. But so you're solving, so that was the initial thing.
That was the initial thing.
Where are you now? And I know you've come a long way. I mean, I understand there's two things. You just said, like, you're just solving a much narrower problem, or you're not trying to take on the whole thing. You want to become part of the ecosystem. But could you describe what you're doing and how technology plays a role in it? Because I think that part is fascinating to me.
So as we started out, because I had come from this sort of analytic background, as we created this program, I wanted to find some metric of success to know that we were actually reducing loneliness, as opposed to, just providing a nice program and maybe people liked it and didn't make them less lonely. And the existing self-reported tools that had been validated out there, when we use them, we just didn't find that the qualitative and the quantitative had anything to do with each other. So we'd administer a survey pre and post that was a validated 3-question loneliness survey. We used a couple of different kinds that are out there that have been validated, and they just didn't match generally up to anything that was happening qualitatively in the groups that we were running. And we looked in the research, and it turned out this was a common problem. And after finally reading a paper where it was an intervention pretty similar to ours, where they were in a country with an integrated health system, and they found that the program was amazingly effective. It reduced healthcare costs among participants by like 1,500 euros a year. It showed in every measure number of contacts people were happening, their outlook, all this stuff. And yet the loneliness measures showed no change. And the conclusion of this study of this great program was we need better measures. And I stopped us what we were doing and I said, we're going to figure out a better measure. And I happened to be in conversation with another person at Civic Hall named Alana Duffy, and she was working on measuring resilience among veterans and how they liked the programs they were taking using this technology called natural language processing, where you could look at somebody's personality using what's called a 5-factor model, which is the oldest, most established personality model in the field of psychology. This is not Myers-Briggs, as I like to tell people, which is generally I refer to as the astrology of the psychology business. This is real science. And it turned out that loneliness and a 5-factor personality model had a strongly statistically significant correlation, both at the overall level of the model as well as individual traits. So if those who don't know it, a 5-factor model is often referred to as OCEAN or CANOE, which stands for conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness, and extroversion. You shouldn't think of those as colloquial terms, but scientific terms in the view of the model. And we, together using that and then a validated loneliness measure and a measure of engagement, we set about building a model. Then the question was how to create or generate the language, because what you're doing with natural language processing is you're analyzing common speech and making insights, including measuring personality from that. And we were already using friendly phone calls at the beginning and end of the program to talk to people and collect the data. And so we built that model with the idea that we would measure our program. And that was the sort of, we stopped in 2019. And at the beginning of 2020, after testing it on a number of places, we felt we were ready to start to implement the program, this metric. And we got hired by a community up in New Haven, Connecticut called the Towers to go out and try and implement this at the community level and see if we could measure people, not just in programs, but in general. And that's what we did.
So
with the thing. Yeah, go ahead.
How is the, I think the Towers, if I remember correctly, still a client of yours?
They still a client with us. They love our work.
So what impact have you had on their operations?
So just one little thing to tell you about them. So they thought they were really sort of progressive, active in terms of what the staff was doing with community, but they landed up doing a survey of their community and were shocked to find that 38% of the residents were lonely. And we happened to meet them at that time, and that's why they were interested in working with us. And so we've done a number of things to help them. First of all, we built this model where we're not just looking at programs and evaluating programs, although we do that for them as well, but we could look over time and measure individuals and see their change in loneliness over time. And what we saw when we were testing our new model of measurement is the quantitative always matched the qualitative, not just in direction, but in degree. So if a group became very well connected over a 12-week period, we showed a huge increase and the qualitative data and the quantitative data matched up nearly like identically. And if we had groups where there wasn't very much cohesion, those groups, the scores didn't move very much. But we were interested in whether we could do this for people in general and whether we could identify not only which programs were effective, but which individuals might need additional attention who were lonely. And once we identified them, were there programs out there that could assist those people? And did they have gaps in their programming? And we've done all of that for them. So now they're able to track that.
How much have you moved the needle from the 38%? Have they done another overall survey to see
So they haven't used that survey to do that. But what we've been able to do is, and they still have a long way to go, I would say, is solutions are hard. But now what they're able to do is focus on those smaller group of individuals. So this is a community of 325 people. About 100 people have basically a significant cognitive impairment that can't participate in the program. So we're usually looking at around 200 and 210 people. First of all, they weren't speaking to a lot of their residents. They were only speaking to the residents who would come forward and speak to them. So now they speak to nearly every resident 3 times a year, and they have these sort of friendly phone calls that we train them to have. So they're in more connection with them. And what that's done is it's driven new kinds of programming, it's driven new kinds of initiatives, and it's changed the way that they operate in terms of their connectivity with the residents. And so we've seen that there's fairly stability in any one moment of people who are lonely at any one time, because it's normal to become lonely and then reconnect. That's natural and normal. And after an initial period where it improved, I would say, 12, 15%. But the number of people who are at high risk for loneliness has declined. And that's been definitely a big improvement. And the overall quality of programming has improved substantially. So resident satisfaction is higher, and that they have tracked. And then they've also been able to do other things like connect up falls with loneliness and start to now address the fall risk, which reduces the amount of loneliness people have, because if people are worried about falling down, they don't leave their apartment. And so we've been able to provide them some integration with other programming where they measure the fall risk, and then we can see what happens with those people in terms of loneliness over time. So I think that they've been super happy. The other piece we've done is, because we're providing them quantitative results on their programming, they've been able to dramatically increase the amount of funding. Like, they probably have 30 to 40% more foundation support than they did when we started in 2020. And I think they would tell you, we provide them with visual representations and data that shows the effectiveness of what they're doing. And today, foundations and donors, they want that verification that their money is actually going to things that actually work.
Excellent. So, couple of things. I think you've told us a bit about what you've learned through the successes and what you do differently. So if you could start Klaatch again, what would you do differently, knowing what you do now?
God, so many mistakes or wrong paths. My original co-founder was the wrong person for what we needed, and that took a long time to sort through and get to the right place. So I would say who you partner with really matters. And I think if it was up to me, I would have done some things differently in terms of financially and equity-wise that I should have really done upfront and didn't. So that's one big lesson. Another lesson is to have a little bit less hubris and more humbleness in your ability to solve problems. Not less confidence, but less surety of that you're right, or that you're going down a road that's going to be in the right place. I think if you're more willing to listen to the market and listen to the people around you, you have a better chance of getting to the right solution faster, and staying at the table longer, which is the third thing. Is this I always knew, but I've really, like, it's solidified in my brain so hard that your ability to solve complicated problems that are important, at least important to you, are directly tied to your ability to stay at the table. If you cannot stay at the table, you cannot solve the problem. And so what we've been able to do is, it took us a long time to get to where we are now, where I feel like we're on a good path. But that's only because we were able to stay at the table for 6 years. and be able to keep the business going and bring in enough revenue and raise enough money to be able to do that. And sticking at the table is really key. I've learned more every year than I learned in all the years combined. So in year one, I learned so much more than I learned in like year three. I learned as much as year three as I did in year one and two combined. In year four, I learned as much as I learned in years one, two, and three as I learned there. So keeping at the table allowed me to get so much smarter about it and be much more willing to explore things that I didn't think were viable, and now thought, oh, it's because I was thinking too narrowly. I was not thinking broadly enough. I wasn't listening enough to other people about what was possible, and was going down alleys that people maybe said I shouldn't go down, but I didn't listen to them. Now I'm much more likely to listen.
So you mentioned the initial 12 grand investment. My guess is that you've had a lot more than that. And I know for a fact that you're applying to the government for some research money. So, two-part question. How else did you raise money apart from this initial very enthusiastic investor? And then secondly, what led you down this path to the, if you will, free government money? And how's that working out?
Well, I will just say that on the government side, I think it will work out eventually, but we're in the wait and see time period. So when I started out, I realized I was going to need to go to a few friends who might be willing to support me through this. And I had had a couple of conversations prior to my friend Mark writing this initial check to my personal bank account. And just telling me, what are you waiting around for? Just go, come on, here's the money, go. And so we haven't raised a huge amount of money, but we've raised about $650,000 over the years to get here. We've generated a certain amount of revenue during that time, and between those two things, we've been able to keep the band together, as they say. We made a pretty significant change when we changed co-founders, and my current co-founder, who is a computer scientist and financial quantitative expert and data scientist, was an important addition to the team that came on about, oh, I would say it's 2.5, 3 years ago now. And that was important. So we started to talk to, I started to talk to my friends and ask them if they would invest, and pushing them to say this was important. They knew I didn't have a solution. They knew I didn't have a product, but they believed in me and my ability to solve problems. I'd been a really good problem solver. And so that's how we got started doing this. We got lucky. We were an AARP startup in residence when we were still offering our program, and that gave us some money. And then finally, we got our first institutional investor last year, and that was the biggest single investor we got in one go, $150,000, and that was very helpful. The government money was a big lift, I will just say, because we decided to go for the gold ring instead of the brass ring. So we applied for over $2.5 million in funding, and we teamed up with the University of Pennsylvania with a very experienced researcher who's interested in the work that we were doing and had the right expertise. And I'm optimistic that we'll either get positive news next month, or we'll reapply and we'll get funding, later in 2024.
So which program is this, Adam?
So we applied for what's called a Small Business Innovation Research Grant. These are grants that are often offered by every part of the federal government through agencies with budgets larger than $100 million. They all set aside a certain amount of money to help spur innovation in their field. In our case, we applied to a institute within the National Institutes of Health, in our case, the National Institute on Aging. that was interested in the kind of technology that we were developing. And together with the University of Pennsylvania, we put together that application along with some assistance from a couple of different consultants that we used to get to the finish line on that. And we were able to complete that, as I said, in over the summer. We're planning on applying for additional grants right now, and we're actually in conversation with other universities for the NIH, as well as for other institutions within the government, including the National Science Foundation.
So how will the money be split between you and the university?
So in our case, the university will get about 800,000, just under $800,000 over a 30-month period. And so we'll have the rest of the money to run the business. Of course, we have to allocate, based on what we're doing, but that's our application. It will enable us to bring on new resources that we've identified, including personnel, and to expand our collaboration with our development partner in Poland, who is now doing some of the coding and development work that needs to be done, and system design work that we're doing. So that they'll pay for that work. And I think our strategy going forward is over the next couple of years to apply for a number of these grants with the hope that we'll meet them. It's called a fast track, what we did, which combines both a phase 1, which is sort of an exploratory grant, and a phase 2, which is developing a commercialization model piece of this. And so we're doing one in one combined grant. So that was sort of like the triple Lindy to be able to do.
To qualify for this kind of money, does what you're doing have to be of benefit to the public, or doesn't it matter what you're doing?
It has to be, so there's a number of different criteria here. So one, the particular organization will tell you what their priorities are, and they'll list them out. And so it's better to be applying for something under which they already have an existing identification of a need that they've published and put out there. And there's literally a manual of those for all the different agencies that, at least within the NIH, which is vast, all the different ones that are out there. And in our case, they were looking for diagnostics and analytics around the kinds of applications that we were developing. So that made it a little bit easier. But in general, they're looking for things that will advance the technology of companies within the United States. That's what they're trying to do. So
Okay,
it's pretty broad and pretty open.
I got one more question regarding investors. You mentioned you had $150,000 from a
Institutional
investor. Now you've got government money. How's that changing the operations of your company? Are you going to have to hire somebody else to do the books and stuff just to make sure it's absolutely transparent?
So we haven't yet gotten to the point where we have an audit requirement. We already have an outside bookkeeper, an accountant who prepares the tax returns, and we use QuickBooks, and I have some expertise, so I'm able to monitor that. But yes, when we go to the government contracting work, it's not a requirement per se for the government, but we want to have good policies and procedures in place, given the amount of money that we're getting. So in the event anybody ever looks, we're in good standing there. We have enough resources to do that, and we've set aside resources to do that. In terms of our investor, I actually have this due tomorrow. We have minimal but regular reporting that we have to do, but it's basically all on, there's nobody looking over our shoulder on that reporting. They're just putting that money in. I should also say that the investor was an accelerator, so they also provided programming and support to us. But our requirement is we have to sort of file these quarterly reports. Originally, they were twice annually, and they've now increased it to quarterly. I'm a little bit annoyed about it.
So, and do you have an exit strategy? And if so, would you
Mhm.
like to talk about that?
I can talk about it for a second. So I think this is a place where my experience as both as an investment banker, as being on the investor side, as well as the going out and soliciting investment really helps. So I would say that you always need from day one an exit strategy. You have to have an idea about how you want to exit. That can change over time, but you always want to have that. Right now, I'm very vocal about the fact that I am trying to get to an exit in the next 3 to 4 years. And so I'm changing some of the ways that we're doing things. We're no longer exploring as much. And now we're trying to develop the technology and the market so that we can show traction sufficient for an investor to want to acquire us. There's usually only two exit strategies in a business like ours, an IPO or a strategic sale. It could also be an asset sale. Um, I am very suspect of our ability and does need to ever get to an IPO. So we're looking and trying to identify what markets are going to be the best places for us and what players might be targets for us for exit even now. And I'm in that process of doing that today in a way that makes it more real. Like if I want to sell to this kind of organization, what am I going to need to do? What information am I going to need to have? What level am I going to need to have gotten to? And working backwards from there to try and get to a sale. So I think in the healthcare and the digital health space, we're going to be an attractive company because we map the topography of loneliness, but we could map other things like depression, anxiety, resilience, etc. And then we map that and match it to programs that are specifically tailored to an individual. I think that technology is going to be valuable, and we're trying to identify which the players are that might want to acquire that technology and expertise.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add? Because you've answered all of my questions.
No, I've it's been fun. It's always fun to talk about sort of living in the entrepreneurial space. I'd say the one thing for other entrepreneurs to just be aware of is there's a lot of responsibility with coming when people start to work for you and you have to pay their salaries and you want to deliver for them. And you know, I have two pieces of advice on that. Listen to those people. You hired them. They probably have something good to say. And if you don't think they do, then you should hire someone else. And two, make sure you take care of yourself because it's stressful to be an entrepreneur and to have all that weight on your shoulders. And if you don't take care of yourself, then you're not going to be as effective and get to the solutions of the important problems you're trying to solve.
Okay, Adam. Adam Greene from Klaatch. Thank you so much for joining me on the
Thanks, Ray.
Founders Predicament. And yeah, I'll see you. I'll see you in a few
I'll
minutes.
see you around. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.